Mitch Albom is an internationally renowned and best-selling author, a journalist, screenwriter, playwright, radio and television broadcaster, and to top it all off, he's also a musician. His books have collectively sold over 28 million copies worldwide. They've been published in some 42 languages around the world and have been made into Emmy Award-winning television movies. His most recognized book, Tuesdays with Morrie, spent, you ready for this, 4 years on the New York Times bestseller list and is now considered the most successful memoir ever published. His best-selling novels include The 5 People You Meet in Heaven and One More Day. The latest book, we're going to talk about that one today, a really profound book, Have a Little Faith. Good to have you on the program.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Been looking forward to this.
Yeah.
You know, I knew that you were a sportscaster. I was just recently in Charleston, South Carolina, and watched an interview, actually part of a panel on the ESPN. So you're still doing some of that. I did not know, I knew you were an author, did not know you were a musician.
Well, I was is a key word. That was my first love, and I started as a musician, and it was also my first failure because I really didn't make it in that business, and it was ultimately deciding I wanted to do something creative, but maybe not music, which wasn't working out, that led me into writing. So I always tell young people, you know, don't worry if you haven't started writing by the time you're 15, because I didn't get to it to my mid-20s, and I had already failed in another profession. Did
you, out of all the things you've done, musician, you said you didn't necessarily do that well, but you did do some recordings, I understand. Sportscaster, sports expert, and now a major best-selling author. Out of all of that, what do you enjoy the best?
Well, music was probably my purest joy, but I think the most satisfying is still writing and writing books. You're left alone, you're in your basement, it's just you and the word, and you get to create something literally from nothing. I mean, there's a blank screen, and then all of a sudden there's something there. It's very much what I liked about music. You know, there's a key. I was a piano player, and there's a keyboard, and there's no sound, and then boom, there's sound, and it's, you know, that's pure creativity. But it's hard. You know, book writing is hard, and when I finish, I usually feel like sleeping for a year because it takes a lot out of me. At least my books, I try to only write them when I think I have something significant to say. I don't churn them out. They don't come out every year or whatever.
As opposed to a lot of authors, their goal is to crank out books.
And I don't blame them. I mean, that's their job, and their publishers want them to, and mine does too. Believe me, they ask me, you know, put them out every year. And I say, I can't. You know, they have to mean something to me. I can't get the energy to write them. So I wait until they matter to me, which means I publish slowly.
Mitch, when you have one book on the New York bestseller list for 4 years, you don't really have to write a book every year.
It bought me a little time.
Yeah, it can buy a little bit of time. Tuesdays with Morrie it's a profound book, but it's not, you know, it's not necessarily an optimistic book. I mean, it's a pretty deep book, and it didn't come out of just a guy wanting to write a book. It came out, it started, it seems to me, out of an experience.
Tuesdays with Morrie, it really started as an accident. I happened to be flipping channels, happened to see Morrie on Nightline talking about what it was like to die from Lou Gehrig's disease.
Wow.
I had lost track of him after 16 years. I'd been in college. We've been very close in college. And then, like a lot of people, I pursued my life and my career and lost track of my old professors or pretty much anybody from that day. And felt very guilty when I saw that he was dying and called him up, thought it'd be a one-time visit, went to visit him, thought it'd be one time of that, and then one led to another, and we ended up visiting all the last Tuesdays that he had in his life. The book was only written to pay his medical bills. I mean, I always laugh when people say, oh, it was bound to be some kind of success. First of all, most people turned Tuesdays with Morrie down. When I wanted to try to help him pay his bills, he had these enormous bills he couldn't afford to. I went to every publisher in New York. Most of them said, not interested, boring book, dying, you're a sports writer, you can't write it. And we finally found one publisher just 3 weeks before he died, and then they printed 20,000 copies, which is not a lot, you know, in terms of certainly not a bestseller kind of thing. And I thought we'd be lucky if they ever sold those. And now, years later, it became something that I never could have seen. So accident is always the word that first comes to mind.
So really, you weren't writing a bestseller. I mean, you weren't thinking about a bestseller. You were going to help a friend. Did you have any comprehension at all that that book would do that well?
No, none. And I think that's probably why it came out the way it did, to be honest with you. I wasn't aiming it to be some kind of bestseller. I didn't know how to write a bestseller of that nature. I'd never done it. In fact, the book was supposed to be 300 pages. And I just wrote the story of what happened. And I kept saying to myself, just keep it simple. It was a beautiful, profound visit with a man who was dying, who told me what was important in life now that he really realized he was going to die. You don't need to embellish that with fancy writing and six-syllable words, yeah. And just keep it simple. And so when I finished, I sent it into the publisher, and I didn't do the word count on it, and it was supposed to be a 300-page book, and they came back and they said, well, you realize this is like 160 pages? And I said, really? I said, because I don't have anything more to say. And fortunately for them, they made the book smaller, which
yeah.
made the pages a little longer. It still only was barely 200 pages. And those have kind of been the size of my books ever since, so I've become comfortable.
To me, that's part of the success of them.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend a lot of time in them, but at the same time, what you get out of them, what you walk away from, is profound.
Thank you.
To be in sports, I mean, that's a pretty high testosterone type of
yeah.
thing, and so you need somewhat of a type A personality. Which I assume you have. You've been very aggressive in your career, and in fact, you talk about that in your book. Yeah. And yet, you started spending Tuesdays with Maury. Was that tough? Was it difficult to, first of all, to make that decision, or did it just kind of happen by osmosis? I mean, to spend that kind of time with a person is not what normally happens
right.
with a type A personality.
I think what happened was because I had known Maury at a time in my life when I wasn't a type A person. I was just a student, and I was very open-minded, and I really loved him as a professor. I mean, he was a charming guy. He was like a yeah. Christmas elf, and he was always happy, and he really was interested in me. And so that time of my life was much simpler. And you're right, if I had just encountered somebody who I didn't know before, and they said, well, will you come every Tuesday till I die? I probably would have said, I got to do something next Tuesday. Yeah. But because he was from this other thing, and I was at that point in my life where I was running, type A, as you point out, but without the satisfaction necessarily. I was piling up accomplishments, but inside I was going, I don't know, shouldn't you feel more satisfied? So he hit me at that right crossroads of time, and he reminded me of someone who I was before I became this type A personality.
Wow.
And so I think I wanted to find myself again with him in those things as much as he wanted me to come see him. And so I always say I got much more out of it, I think, than Maury did. And I was happy to be able to write that story.
Have a little faith. I got into the book and couldn't get out of it. I mean, I got into it and really couldn't get out of it, and came out with a lot of questions I wanted to ask Mitch about this book. First of all, it was another experience
right.
out of your life. I mean, it wasn't something you just researched and did. This was a big slice of your life.
Yeah. 8 years.
With your rabbi, mm-hmm. the guy that was on the pedestal mm-hmm. Most of your life, and with a guy you'd never met before who was not really on anybody's pedestal right. for that matter in Detroit. Inner city ministry, a guy that had a criminal background and had become a Christian, had found Christ, and all of a sudden the guy's life has changed and he committed himself to some pretty deep experiences in his own life.
Yeah.
Two totally different people. Why?
Well, it was the two totally different people part of it that I thought made it an interesting story. It began with the rabbi, as you point out, of my childhood synagogue, who I had known my whole life. And when you're right, when I was a kid, I was terrified of him. I ran the opposite direction. He was the man of God, and I was convinced that he would just look at me, and even if I hadn't done anything wrong, he would find something and wag a finger at me. I used to hide in the mop closet, I remember, in the synagogue just until he passed, because I was so afraid of him.